Chapter 26:41. Qin Mu froze for a moment, but she wisely chose to remain silent. She did not accept it, nor did she deny it. Zhou Chengwang's eyes were burning. He felt a little uncomfortable, but he still endured it. He really had no right at all now. He could do nothing but bless her. After a pause, he slowly said, "Kiki's face needs a few surgeries. I'll be responsible for it until the end. I owe her." He paused for a moment and smiled bitterly. "Look, Mumu, I'm always hurting your heart. I'm sorry." Qin Mu's throat seemed to be blocked. She thought of Zhou Chengwang and Gu Mei's chaotic marriage life. There was nothing to blame. The best punishment had been given to him. What else could she say? She said in a low voice, "Zhou Chengwang, as long as you think it's right, you should do it." She sighed and said, "Don't let any girl cry for you anymore." His eyes were still burning on her. He had a lot to say to her, but he swallowed every word when it came to his mouth. In the end, he had no right to say it. She understood what had happened to Kiki, even if he didn't explain it. That similar face, that same trick. Just like how Lin Shui was just a substitute for Shui. How could Chi-Chi not be Qin Mu's? Unexpectedly, in the end, Zhou Chengwang still explained, "I didn't have sex with her. I didn't have sex with anyone." Just then, Aunt Zhang came over and heard this. She was annoyed and said softly, "Mr. Zhou, Shumu seems to be asleep." Zhou Chengwang looked down and saw that the little guy was full. He was already sleeping soundly. Their conversation didn't affect his sleep at all. His eyes softened. He declined Aunt Zhang's kindness to take Shuemu upstairs. He held the child himself, then raised his eyebrows and looked at Qin Mu. "Let's go see Shuemu's room." Qin Mu forced a smile and went with him. He couldn't do anything in front of Shuemu, but a minute later, she received a huge shock. Xiao Shuemu's baby's room was mainly light blue in the Mediterranean style. It was decorated very warmly, and it was obvious that he had put a lot of effort into it. What shocked Qin Mu was the photo on top of a small cupboard. It was a wedding photo of her and Zhou Chengwang. Also, there was a photo frame on the bedside table. It was a photo of her and Zhou Chengwang. Qin Mu's fingers abruptly stopped as she looked at him. What was he trying to say? What was he trying to tell her? Was Zhou Chengwang trying to tell Shuemu that his mother was Qin Mu? This was ridiculous. Although Qin Shin had said so that day, it was just a joke. However, what Zhou Chengwang did was too incredible and a little abnormal. Qin Mu's face was a little pale. Her voice was low and hoarse. "What is this, Zhou Chengwang? It's boring." Zhou Chengwang smiled and looked at her. "Mumu, are you angry?" "Yes, I'm angry." Qin Mu's tears flowed down. "Zhou Chengwang, I hate you." He looked at her quietly, then carefully put Shuemu on the small round bed. He walked over and reached out to wipe away her tears. His voice was even more gentle. "Mumu, this is a dream of mine. I couldn't help but do it." Chapter 26:42. Qin Mu had been stiff the whole time. She was simply at a loss, because the most bitter thing in her heart had been hooked up by him. How could he do this? How could he do this? Her fists were pounding on his shoulder desperately. Her face was full of tears, and she couldn't help crying. "Zhou Chengwang, how could you do this to me?" She had never been so vulnerable, not even when they divorced, not when she knew his choice. She cried like a child, but she was afraid to wake up Xiao Shuemu, so her voice was very low, and he could only keep patting her back and comforting her. "Mumu," she lay on his shoulder and bit him hard, so hard that it was bleeding, but he still endured it and didn't move. He was still coaxing her gently. He knew that he had gone too far and shouldn't have told her, but this was a dream of his. It was a dream hidden in his heart. In this life, she was the only wife in his heart, and she was also the only mother of Shuemu. He hugged her and slowly tightened her arms. He even wanted to kiss her, but Qin Mu avoided him. He didn't force her anymore. He pressed his lips against her neck and stood there without moving. She was still trembling and crying, and she was still cursing him in a low voice. Xiao Shuemu was sleeping quietly. His little face was natural and healthy, and his breath was sweet. It seemed that he couldn't notice the thousands of wounds between them. The quiet and depressing scene was very much like a quarreling parent and a sleeping child. There was the pain of being torn apart, but it was suppressed and mended because of the child. In the end, Qin Mu forgot whether she had eaten or not. When she came back to her senses, she was already in the car. It was Zhou Chengwang who was driving. She looked at him sideways, and after a while, she said softly, "Take me home." He held the steering wheel with one hand and stroked her long hair with the other. "Qin Mu, do you want me to apologize?" Her voice was still a little hoarse. "Is there any use in apologizing?" He smiled and said, "It's useless, but it might make you feel better." Qin Mu paused, then said in a low voice, "How are you going to explain this to Xue Mu in the future? I can't be his mother." Zhou Chengwang chuckled. "I'll tell him that his mother and I are divorced. She can only visit him occasionally." He looked at her. "You're going to see him, right?" "No," Qin Mu said resolutely. Zhou Chengwang was also silent for a while. After a long time, he said in a low voice, "Qin Mu, you're only in New York for a period of time. Can you come and see him?" Qin Mu looked at him. "I know you will go back to be city, so Mu, I beg you." "I can't stay in New York all the time," he begged in a low voice. For a moment, Qin Mu didn't know what to say. She even felt sorry for him. It was because Gume was really not suitable to be the child's mother. However, it was too ridiculous to say that Xue Mu was her child. She said awkwardly, "You can find one of your girlfriends to be his mother. I think those women will be very happy." "But I don't want to," he said in a low and serious voice. Qin Mu was a little angry. "I don't want to either. Did you hear that? Zhou Chengwang, put away the photos when you go back. I don't want to see them." Chapter 2643. Qin Mu was stunned and didn't say anything else. He continued to drive her all the way to Qin Chen's place. When the car stopped, Qin Mu wanted to get out of the car, but she found that the door was locked. She patted the door and said, "Zhou Chengwang, open the door for you." "Mumu." He frowned. "Remember to eat when you get back." She glared at him and said, "I've eaten. You only cried and didn't eat much. Annie Zhang and the others were scared by you," Zhou Chengwang said quietly, and there was a hint of affection in his tone. Qin Mu's eyes became more fierce. She patted the door again, but he still didn't move. She didn't know where she got the ability to unfasten her seatbelt and walk towards him. The car he drove was very spacious, so she easily sat in it. This was the first time since their divorce that Qin Mu had taken the initiative. Angrily taken the initiative. She sat on his lap and in his arms, holding his collar with her little hand, and said softly, "Zhou Chengwang, you want to have sex with me, don't you?" This series of changes made Zhou Chengwang a little confused. He looked straight at her and said in a low voice, "Qin Mu." Qin Mu's little hand gently unbuttoned one of the buttons on his shirt. Then another. His Adam's apple kept moving, which was a bit sexy. "Mumu, this is the car," he reminded her in a hoarse voice. Qin Mu grabbed his collar with her little hand, leaned over, and whispered against the corner of his mouth, "Zhou Chengwang, you can't control your crotch. Even if we have sex again, so what? It can only mean that you betrayed Gume. There's nothing else." She sat on him, and they both knew how embarrassed he was at the moment. And his forehead was already covered with fine sweat, which was the sweat of holding back. And his eyes were like a small cluster of flames, which looked particularly bright in the dim car. When Qin Mu wanted to leave, it was already too late. His palm held the back of her waist and slowly pushed her forward, allowing her to understand his impatience. His other hand pressed on her little head, and he slowly brought her to his lips. His voice was hoarse and hoarse. "Qin Mu, you'd better not provoke a man who has been abstinent for almost half a year." Qin Mu was stunned. He was mentioning this again. "What does your abstinence have to do with me? No one asked you to keep your chastity like jade. Besides, shouldn't you be bragging to the current Mrs. Zhou?" She tried to kick at him, but the way they were, the more she kicked, the closer he was. Originally, Zhou Chengwang could still endure it, but how could he endure it now? The person sitting in his arms was someone that he liked so much but couldn't have. His mind immediately snapped. He did not dare to go overboard. He only dared to press her down and let her do it. Qin Mu was stunned. She was forced to lie in his arms, feeling his hot breath and the rough way he was. He was no longer the man who was high and mighty, but a man who was as rough as he could be. She opened her eyes wide and looked at him in disbelief. She could not believe that he would do this to her. She was wearing jeans. Was he not afraid of pain? Did she think that they would be worn out? However, his breathing was so hoarse, and his breath was so hot that she was about to scream. It sprayed on her neck again and again. Chapter 2644. Qin Mu widened her eyes and looked at the man in front of her. She finally came back to her senses and hit him. "Zhou Chengwang, you bastard!" His eyes were originally closed, but at this moment they were completely opened. Just like that, he looked at her with clear jade eyes. He kissed her little mouth and said in a low voice, "You're the one who provoked me. Be good and bear with it for a while." His courage was only limited to doing it through clothes. He wouldn't dare to do it if it was real, but that would make him seem even more shameless and indescribable. Qin Mu couldn't push him away, and the more she pushed, the more shamelessly he got closer. She could only lie on his shoulder and bear with it, waiting for him to recover. But just like he said, he hadn't touched a woman for months, and it was through clothes. How could there be any happiness? This kind of behavior could ease the distance between them. He hugged her like he was intoxicated and didn't want to let go. Half an hour passed, and Qin Mu couldn't take it anymore. She felt a little pain and bit his shoulder. "Is Zhou Chengwang done?" Then his breath heated up. He pressed her down tightly and didn't make a sound. There was a sweet scent in the air, and Qin Mu's face heated up. Then she felt a little disgusted. She was the one who started teasing him. It was originally malicious, but now she didn't know how to end it. Qin Mu pursed her lips and pressed her forehead against his shoulder. She didn't want to move because she would feel even more uncomfortable if she did. Zhou Chengwang was the same. He sighed. "Qin Mu, don't call me." She sounded like she was about to cry. It was really embarrassing. Zhou Chengwang sighed again. He closed his eyes and enjoyed it for a while, reminiscing about it. Sympathy for Zhou Zong, who hadn't had sex for a few months. After a while, he carried her with one hand and placed her on one of his thighs. With the other hand, he grabbed a tissue from the cabinet to clean himself up. He didn't avoid her and cleaned himself up directly. Qin Mu saw everything. She turned her face away uncomfortably, and he slowly cleaned up and straightened his clothes. He looked at her with an unfathomable gaze. "Qin Mu, do you want it?" If there was nothing going on between her and Guze, he was sure that there was nothing going on between them. If there was, she wouldn't have stayed in New York for months. If not, then she had been alone for a long time, and he had been like that just now. Would she feel bad? At this time, Zhou Chengwang really stood in the perspective of a man to care for her. He enjoyed it himself and could not ignore her. He really did not have the slightest intention of playing a rogue, nor did he have the intention of being shameless. He was afraid that she would feel uncomfortable. To put it bluntly, he just wanted to help her solve it. However, Qin Mu misunderstood and glared at him. "Zhou Chengwang." Zhou Chengwang smiled slightly. "Mu, tell me, huh?" She gave him a slap in the face. Qin Mu was really angry. He was shameless. After he was slapped, he didn't get angry. He just looked at her with a deep gaze. After a while, he said in a low voice, "Qin Mu, do you think I'm very shameless?" She didn't answer and moved to the other side, but he held her. He buried his face in her neck and said heavily, "Don't worry, I won't really touch you." Chapter 2645. Qin Mu bit her lip hard. After a long time, she said in a low voice, "Zhou Chengwang, let go of me." He didn't want to let go, so he still put his arm around her shoulder and said in a lower voice, Mu, I'm serious." Qin Mu was furious. She was embarrassed and annoyed. "I don't need it." At this time, he had completely calmed down and was in the mood to tease her. Probably because he had been satisfied for a long time, everything was fine. His temper was very good, and he was very tolerant of her. His thin lips pressed against her ear, and he said in a low voice, Mu, I'm serious. "Do you want—" Qin Mu was so angry that she slapped him. Zhou Chengwang turned his handsome face to one side. He was not angry, but just looked at her with a chuckle. Qin Mu was getting angrier and angrier. She glared at him and said, "Zhou Chengwang, if you don't open the door, I'll call someone." However, he pulled her into his arms and said in a low and hoarse voice, Moo Moo, your body doesn't behave like this. With a bang, Qin Mu's face turned red. She wanted to raise her hand and hit him, but she was stopped by Zhou Chengwang. His eyes fell on her face, and he smiled. Moo Moo, if you need anything, just look for me. Shameless. Despicable. Qin Mu was infuriated. Then he sat down heavily in his arms. Zhou Chengwang couldn't stand sitting like this, and his handsome face turned pale in an instant. Qin Mu pressed the button, opened the door, and quickly got out of the car. Zhou Chengwang was still sitting in the car, covering the place where he couldn't look directly at, and beads of sweat rolled down his forehead. It seemed that he was in great pain. Qin Mu had been running for a long time, but when she found that the car was not moving, she was still worried and ran back. She watched carefully, for fear that he would get out of the car and take her into the car. Looking out of the car window, she saw Zhou Chengwang sprawled on the ground, clutching that area. She could see the side of his face, which was filled with pain. Qin Mu pursed her lips, knocked on the window, and called his name, Zhou Chengwang. He still did not move. Did you injure yourself from sitting too long? No matter what, Qin Mu couldn't abandon him. She walked to his side and opened the car door to see how he was doing. However, the moment she opened the door, he caught her arm and pressed her into his arms. A small hand was suddenly grabbed by him, and his voice was scorching. Help me rub it. Qin Mu was dumbfounded. Her little hands were forced to do all kinds of shameful things, and no matter how much she struggled, it was useless. He was still rational and didn't go overboard. After about a minute, he let go of her. In the end, his breathing was messy as he stared into her eyes. Qin Mu, I've always wanted to let you go, but you're always teasing me. Wasn't it good that she left just now? Why did she come back to care about him? Zhou Chengwang sighed helplessly and kissed her hair. Qin Mu didn't move, because it was useless for her to struggle. He didn't want to let go of her, and she couldn't escape. She just stayed in his arms and said softly, Zhou Chengwang, what do I have to do for you to let me go? He held his breath and looked at her quietly. Chapter 2646. Zhou Chengwang lowered his eyes and chuckled. After a long time, he let go of her. Qin Mu, you're right. I'm shameless. I shouldn't have touched you, but I couldn't help it. He said in a low voice, I'll let you go. When he said those words, his voice was extremely hoarse, and his eyes were a little red. Qin Mu moved to the side slowly and didn't leave immediately. She turned her face and looked at him, saying softly, You kissed and hugged me. Did you just want to talk to me? His body trembled for a moment before he turned his head and looked into her eyes. A tear rolled down from the corner of Qin Mu's eye. Her lips trembled slightly. Look at Chengwang. You always make me cry and make me sad. He didn't say anything, but his breathing was very, very light. We can't be together, Chengwang. Her voice was even softer now. You're fine, all right? Because when he was like this, she would feel sad too. It was fine if she didn't see it, but if she did, she would feel sad. She could still remember when she saw Zhou Chengwang when she was 14 years old. He was like the white moonlight. Almost 10 years had passed. She would rather he be happy and Gu may be beautiful. That way, the dream in her heart would still be there. She didn't want him to lead such a miserable life. She used to think that if he was miserable and he and Gume weren't good, she would be proud. But that wasn't the case. She couldn't be happy. He was in pain, he was sad, and she felt sorry for him. He even looked for those small celebrities to have meals with. She believed him when he said he didn't touch them, because after the divorce, he didn't have a need to lie to her anymore. After she said that, her lips were trembling. Her brown hair fell over her shoulders and her eyes were misty. This was the most beautiful he had ever seen her. He didn't know when, but he kissed her. His firm body pressed against hers as he kissed her fiercely. Qin Mu's body was stiff at first, but it softened. Later on, she reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder, kissing him crazily. She took the initiative to reach out. This kiss, like the last time, was very crazy, very crazy. She responded to him, gave him one last passionate kiss, more intense than any of their kisses had ever been. This kiss burned for a very, very long time, so long that her neck felt sore. After struggling for a while, he slowly let go of her. Their eyes met, and the air was filled with a sense of despair. Qin Mu's lips curled into a wry smile. Chongwang, that's it. It's impossible between us. You still love me, don't you? He asked in a trembling voice. Qin Mu did not answer him, but gave him a smile. So what if you love me? You loved me back then, but you still divorced me because of Shuemu. Could be changed now? She no longer had the mood or the courage to manage the relationship between them. She was very tired, and she liked it this way. So, Zhou Chongwang, I'm fine, so I hope you're fine too. But we really can't go on like this anymore. Qin Mu's smile pierced right into Zhou Chongwang's heart. He understood now. She loved him, but her love was reserved. She loved the Zhou Chongwang in her heart, and not this unclear, messy Zhou Chongwang. Chapter 26:47. He reached out and brushed the hair off her forehead. Be good in the future, and I'll be good too, okay? As he spoke, he opened the car door and let her get out. Although he was unwilling, he still did it. Let go. When Qin Mu got out of the car, her legs were weak. She stood by the car and looked down at him. Zhou Chongwang slowly lowered the car window, looked at her, and smiled. Mu, be happy. As he said that, he reached out and rubbed her long hair. Qin Mu took a step back, but then she felt that it was a little inappropriate. So she stood still, but she looked a little uncomfortable. Zhou Chongwang smiled faintly. He drove the sports car away very slowly and looked at her standing in the bright spring sunshine in the rearview mirror, looking at her endless beauty. A faint smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. It was good to be like this. At least she didn't hate him. At least he still loved her. In his world, they were together. As for Qin Mu, he stood at his original spot and watched quietly. She wasn't indifferent, but just like she said, they couldn't go back. She turned around and walked into the villa quietly. As soon as she entered, she saw Qin Shen sitting in the living room. Qin Mu paused for a moment. Didn't you say that you had an important experiment to do? Qin Shen smiled. I'm done. I'll come back to accompany you. Don't give me that. Qin Mu glanced at him and sat opposite him. Then, she looked a little dazed. Qin Shen smiled. What's wrong? I saw Zhou Chongwang's car parked outside for a long time just now. Did you have an accident with his car? Qin Mu couldn't help glaring at him. I'll go back to City B next week. Don't. Qin Shen finally became serious. I won't joke anymore. His voice became gentler. Qin Mu, if you don't want to, no one can force you. Qin Mu looked down. I know what you mean, but Qin Shen and I really can't be together. Don't do this kind of thing again. Qin Shen smiled. Okay. After that, he didn't mention Zhou Chongwang anymore. Instead, he made a cup of coffee for Qin Mu and they enjoyed a leisurely afternoon together. Later, Qin Mu would occasionally visit Xiao Shuemu, and Zhou Chongwang would also appear occasionally. He just nodded and didn't have any intention of asking her to stay for dinner. This way, Qin Mu was quite relaxed. She quite liked Shuemu, but most of the time, he was just helping Qin Shen deliver things. Qin Shen was really busy after that. Just like that, about half a month passed. Zhou Chongwang didn't have any intention of leaving New York, but Qin Mu was going to leave. In the afternoon, Xiao Shuemu fell asleep upstairs, and Zhou Chongwang was waiting on the sofa in the living room as usual. The person who gave Xiao Shuemu the medicine was Qin Shen's assistant, Eisen. Eisen handed the medicine to Zhou Chongwang and was about to leave after saying a few words with a smile. Zhou Chongwang stopped him. Wait a minute. Eisen turned his head and looked at him. Mr. Zhou? Zhou Chongwang pursed his lips and said softly, Where's Miss Qin? Eisen said in fluent Chinese, She's doing an experiment. Zhou Chongwang coughed lightly. I mean, Qin Mu. Eisen understood and then chuckled. She's back home. Back home? B City? Zhou Chongwang didn't ask any more questions. Thank you. Eisen's gaze fell on his face for a long time before he left. Zhou Chongwang stood in the living room and was stunned for a long time. It wasn't until he heard Shuemu crying upstairs that he came back to his senses and went upstairs, but he was still in a daze. Chapter 26:48. Zhou Chongwang didn't leave New York immediately because of Qin Mu's departure. He stayed in New York for another half a month. By the time he returned to B City, little Shuemu had already learned how to babble. Whenever this happened, he would stare at little Shuemu in a daze. In his heart, That was a very beautiful picture. His and Chi Mu's child would slowly grow up and learn to call mother and father. Every time this happened, Zhou Chengwang's heart would be very sad. He still left New York. When he set foot on the Landeby city, he took a deep breath. Instead of going back to the hotel, he went straight to the company. Zhou Chengwang was sitting in the car with his eyes closed to rest when his phone suddenly rang. He frowned and answered the call with a deep frown. Chi-Chi. Kiki's voice was very soft and careful. Zhou Zong, I've completed the first stage of the surgery. Zhou Chengwang held the phone and hummed. His voice was slow and deep. What did the doctor say? Kiki's voice was a little cheerful. The doctor said that I'm recovering very well. I'll be able to remove the gauze in a few days. Zhou Chengwang smiled faintly. That's good. Kiki paused for a moment and said very slowly, Zhou Zong, can you come and see me? Kiki was now in Korea. She was eager to see Zhou Chengwang, even if it was just a word of encouragement from him. Zhou Chengwang's smile became even more indifferent. I still have some work to deal with. If there's anything, I'll ask my secretary to go over, okay? His tone was gentle and calm, but there was a hint of alienation in it. Kiki probably didn't expect him to refuse. She was stunned for a moment and said softly, then okay, goodbye, Zhou Zong. Zhou Chengwang grunted and slowly hung up the phone. Then he looked at his phone coldly. Zi said that he treated Kiki a little too well. Even if he felt guilty, he couldn't do that. Otherwise, women would easily have a sense of dependence and misconception. Although his marriage was a mess now, he didn't want to get involved in unnecessary trouble. It was a must to treat Kiki's face, but it was better to keep a distance. Zhou Chengwang put down his phone and didn't say anything else. When he arrived at the company, the little secretary came to report to him. She hesitated for a moment before saying in a low voice, Zhou Zong, Miss Lin Shui called twice to invite you to dinner, and that Kiki called dozens of times, almost 2 times a day, asking if Zhou Zong came to the company. Zhou Chengwang had been in New York for about a month. His cell phone number in B City was useless. No one could find him, so all the calls came to the company. After the little secretary finished speaking, Zhou Chengwang's gaze paused for a moment, and then he smiled faintly. I got it. He walked into the office, and the little secretary was stunned. Then, she chatted with the second secretary beside her. Look, Zhou Zong is just like that to Kiki. He didn't respond much to dozens of calls. The second secretary played with her delicate fingernails and pulled her red lips. That's true. Zhou Zong loves Miss Qin the most. Look, whether it's Gu Mei or these small stars, who is more beautiful than Miss Qin? Qin Mu looks like an ideal wife in men's hearts. She is the kind of person who is especially comfortable at home. These people, whether in appearance or temperament, can't compare with Miss Qin. It's normal that Zhou Zong can't forget her, right? Chapter 2649. Do you think that Zhou Zong divorced voluntarily? It was Gu Mei who forced him to marry her. They were a good couple, but she had to make things difficult for him. Now, the secretary lowered her voice. I overheard Vice President Zhao on the phone the other day. He said that Gu Mei had gone crazy and is now in the mental hospital. The second secretary swallowed hard. Really? Really? The little secretary nodded seriously. The second secretary sighed. I didn't expect that. The secretary sighed too. Yeah, he used to be so powerful, but now he's so crazy. That's why I say that Zhou Zong is poisonous. You can't touch him. The second secretary looked at her. Do you think that Kiki is stupid? She's already like that, but she's still thinking about Zhou Zong? I think Lin Shui is the smartest one among these women. She knows when to advance and when to retreat. The secretary gave her a look of approval. Just as they were gossiping, Zhao Zi came over and coughed. The two secretaries were startled and their faces changed. Zhao Zi snorted. You know what will happen if the news about Zhou Zong gets out? Then he walked towards Zhou Chengwang's office. He knocked on the door and opened it, only to be choked by the thick smoke inside. You really don't want to live. Zhao Zi complained as he opened the window to let in some air, while Zhou Chengwang leaned against the desk and smoked, doing nothing. Zhao Zi said impatiently, Go back and rest if you don't want to work. Why are you smoking here? There's no point in going back to the hotel. Zhou Chengwang's tone became even more indifferent. Zhao Zi looked at him and couldn't say anything for a while. After a long time, he said, Chengwang, Gumei has gone crazy. Why don't you divorce her? Maybe there's still hope for Qin Mu. Huh? Zhou Chengwang took a long drag on the cigarette. When he exhaled the smoke, he said softly, Z, I don't deserve her anymore. After going through so much, he didn't have the face to get her back. Even Qin Mu herself said that they could not go back to the past. Perhaps she still could not forget him, but she was determined to give him up. He had some understanding of Qin Mu's temperament. If she wanted to do something, no one could stop her. Zhao Zi looked at him and was furious. He reached out to snuff out the cigarette in his hand and said indifferently, You have to try whether it works or not, right? Zhou Chengwang looked at Zhao Zi and smiled. Then, he lit a cigarette and smoked slowly. I met her in New York. She rejected me. Zhao Zi was taken aback. Z, don't make things difficult for her, Zhou Chengwang said quietly. She's innocent. Zhao Zi, he didn't know what to say. In the end, he didn't say anything else. Instead, he said stop smoking. Let's go for a drink tonight. Zhou Chengwang smiled faintly in agreement. At this time, Zhao Zi seemed to think of something. He frowned and said, That Keek, what's your plan? Zhao Zi thought that she was nice and sensible. He knew that Chengwang didn't like her, so he didn't ask for too much. But when Chengwang was away for a month, she crossed the line. There must be a reason why he asked this. Zhou Chengwang smiled and said, She should be responsible for what she should be responsible for. As for the rest, let her back off. Zhao Zi nodded. That's true. Chapter 2650. At Night Bar. Zhou Chengwang and Zhao Zi sat face to face. Zhou Chengwang puffed out a cloud of smoke and calmly recounted what happened in New York. Zhao Zi listened patiently. In the end, he smiled and said, That's pretty good. He really hoped that Zhou Chengwang could start over. Even if there was no love, he could live a normal life for Xiao Shuimu. It was obvious that there was no hope for Qin Mu. It would be best if Chengwang could let it go. Zhou Chengwang looked at Zhao Zi, smiled, and drank the wine in his glass. After that, he poured himself another glass. Zhao Zi couldn't help saying, Take it easy, bro. Zhou Chengwang smiled and didn't say anything. He just smoked quietly. Zhao Zi moved closer. Are you still thinking about Qin Mu? It was rare for Zhou Chengwang to joke. Z, do you still think about her? Zhao Zi shook his head and smiled. I did before, but I don't anymore. I don't dare to think about it anymore. Probably because he didn't want to talk about it anymore. He picked up his mug and said, Come, let's drink. Zhou Chengwang clinked glasses with him and was about to drink when his phone rang. He looked down at the call and his eyes dimmed. Who's calling? You look terrible. Zhao Zi blew out a ring of smoke and asked softly. Zhou Chengwang turned his phone to silent and put it aside. He took a sip of wine and was in a bad mood. Zhao Zi moved closer to take a look and immediately understood that it was Chi-Chi who was calling. He sighed. I really can't get close to this woman. She didn't have any improper thoughts when I paid for a meal in the past. Now that she cares a little more, she can't get rid of her. Zhou Chengwang held his mug and smiled. She'll be fine after a while. Zhao Zi coughed. Well, if her face hadn't been destroyed, would you have had such thoughts? Zhou Chengwang's gaze paused for a moment. No. After a while, he said softly, I don't have such thoughts now. Zhao Zi smiled and said nothing more. The light on his phone was on. After a while, it went dark, and after a while, it lit up again. He dialed it 3 or 4 times before it stopped. Zhou Chengwang and Zhao Zi drank a little too much. He didn't even know how he got back to the hotel. Just as he was about to swipe the card to open the door, a thin figure stood at the door. Wearing a hat, Zhou Chengwang couldn't see his face clearly, but Zhou Chengwang recognized him immediately. He didn't open the door immediately. Instead, he leaned against the door and looked at Kiki. What are you doing here? Chi-Chi was still wearing a mask on her face, but it could be seen that her exposed skin was much better. Just like what she said, the surgery was very successful. But for Zhou Chengwang, this only made him feel less guilty. He really didn't feel anything else. At this moment, facing his coldness, Kiki seemed a little helpless. After a while, she said in a low voice, "You haven't answered the phone. I'm a little worried." She looked at him and finally mustered up the courage to step forward and help him. Zhou Chengwang took a step back and looked at her coldly. His voice was slightly hoarse. "I think I've made it very clear. There's no possibility between us." Kiki's hand fell in the air. After a while, she said with difficulty, "Do you dislike my face?" Chapter 26:51. I can only congratulate you. Zhou Chengwang's voice became even colder. "Kiki, don't call you in the future, and don't come looking for me, understand?" She shook her head. "I just care about you." "No need." Zhou Chengwang smiled. "Stay away from me, or it won't do you any good, understand?" Kiki was stunned. After a long while, she said softly, "You went to New York and saw her, didn't you?" Zhou Chengwang's gaze was cold. "If you're smart, don't provoke her." He then opened the door, but he didn't go in immediately. Instead, he stood at the door and said coldly, "If you dare hurt Qin Mu, I promise I'll make you wish you were dead." "I didn't," Kiki explained hurriedly. But Zhou Chengwang's gaze was even colder. He didn't say anything else and closed the door. Chi-Chi stood where she was and lowered her eyes. It was only after a long while that she smiled softly. Zhou Zong only had his ex-wife in his heart. She was envious, but there were some things that couldn't be obtained even if she was envious. She could only fight for it herself. Days passed. Kiki didn't disturb Zhou Chengwang anymore. For months later, she made a comeback, and it was shocking. Lin Shui asked Zhou Chengwang out for dinner, but Zhou Chengwang rejected her. But Lin Shui went straight to the CEO's office to block him. The secretary couldn't stop her, so she followed behind and said, "Miss Lin, you're making things difficult for us." The secretary tried to stop her, but she didn't mean it. After all, Lin Shui had helped Gu Mei when she was in trouble last time. But she had to put on a show. Otherwise, she wouldn't be able to handle Zhou Zong. But no matter how hard she tried, Lin Shui still rushed into Zhou Chengwang's office. Zhou Chengwang had just hung up the phone, looked up at Lin Shui, and then looked at the little secretary sharply. "Zhou Zong, I couldn't stop him," the little secretary said, feeling wronged. How could Zhou Chengwang not know? Thus, he said calmly, "There's nothing else for you to do. You can leave." So the little secretary left happily. "Tell me, what's the matter? If it's just a meal, then there's no need." Zhou Chengwang walked back to his desk and sat down, holding his tie. Lin Shui leaned against the door and sneered at him. "Yes, Gu Mei is locked inside. Zhou Zong doesn't need me anymore. I don't even need to be perfunctory." Zhou Chengwang was still looking at her. There was no expression on his handsome face. He said calmly, "Speak." As he spoke, he took out a cigarette from the box on the table and lit it. Lin Shui walked over. She placed her hands on both sides of the desk and bent her body slightly. Zhou Chengwang only needed to take a glance to see the spring scenery, but he had no intention of doing so. His gaze fell on Lin Shui's face. Lin Shui gently took out a photo from her bag and threw it in front of Zhou Chengwang. "Zhou Chengwang, take a look at this." Zhou Chengwang's gaze lingered on her face for a long time before it fell on the photo. Then, his eyes narrowed dangerously. Was that Qin Mu? No. To be precise, it should be a woman who looked like Qin Mu. Lin Shui moved her chin and sneered. "Can you tell who this is?" Zhou Chengwang's gaze still fell on the photo coldly, and then he slowly picked it up. Chapter 26:52. There was a hint of mockery in Lin Shui's voice. "Director Zhou, there are many kinds of women in this world, especially those who are timid. When they encounter love, they will become especially bold. These kinds of women usually look harmless, but in reality, they are extremely dangerous." Zhou Chengwang finally looked at her. "Is this Kiki?" Lin Shui smiled, even more mockingly. It's rare that Zhou Zong can still recognize her. Zhou Chengwang's eyes fell on the photo again. "A little lamb has turned into a lioness. Zhou Zong, it's too late to regret it." Lin Shui reminded him coldly. "Don't regret it when it's too late." Zhou Chengwang looked at her. Lin Shui straightened up and flipped her long hair. "Also, not every woman will pester you, Zhou Zong." Zhou Chengwang smiled. Let me treat you to dinner. I have an appointment with a producer tonight. Lin Shui smiled casually. I'll be the female lead in the next film. Zhou Chengwang looked at her. Lin Shui shrugged. But the producer is a little ugly. She sounded a little regretful. Zhou Chengwang immediately understood what she meant. He smiled and said, "Give me his business card. I'll help if I can." He was being vague, and so was Lin Shui. It was better not to say some things. Lin Shui didn't come here for nothing. She mainly wanted to make an exchange. She just didn't want to sleep with that ugly man, and Zhou Chengwang was the one who could talk to her. Now, she could kill two birds with one stone. Lin Shui left in satisfaction, and Zhou Chengwang looked at the similar photo. He picked it up, lit it with a lighter, and burned it to ashes. That night, he and Lin Shui didn't have dinner together, but he called the producer and hinted that he had a good relationship with Lin Shui. The producer understood, and after thinking for a long time, he decided to give the role to Lin Shui. Zhou Chengwang went to Zhao Yan's restaurant. He hadn't been there for a long time, and it seemed that he hadn't seen Qin Mu for a long time. As he was thinking about this, he unexpectedly saw Qin Mu there. She was sitting with Zhao Yan, and Zhao Yan's wife was also sitting with them. Zhao Yan's wife was already 6 months pregnant. Her belly was a little big. When she talked to Qin Mu, she looked happy. It could be seen that she had a good relationship with Zhao Yan. Zhou Chengwang didn't go over. He chose a seat and sat down, looking over there. Qin Mu had been talking to Zhao Yan and the others. Unexpectedly, she looked over. Then, her vision became a little blurry, and she smiled faintly. Their relationship had become like this. When they saw each other, they could smile and greet each other. Zhou Chengwang thought of breaking up peacefully. Actually, he didn't want to break up peacefully. He would rather keep the pain in his heart for the rest of his life. However, he couldn't bear to see Qin Mu like that. As long as he was in pain, it was good. She had to be well. This was the only thing he could do for her. So he smiled back. Later, Zhao Yan went on stage to play the piano. It was still the same song, Divel. His little wife had a happy smile on her face as she kept time with the sound of the piano. However, in Zhou Chengwang's eyes, it was a little ironic. Zhao Yan's song was played for Qin Mu. His gaze fell on Qin Mu's face. It was so intense that Qin Mu couldn't ignore it. She looked at Zhao Yan's wife and said gently, "I'll go over." "Okay." Chapter 26:53. Qin Mu wanted to say something, but he had already said a few words to the waiter. "Zhou Chengwang, I'm not here to eat with you." Qin Mu couldn't help but say. The waiter was at a loss. Zhou Chengwang closed the menu and said indifferently, "That's it." After Qin Mu and the others left, she glared at him. "Are you still acting on your own?" He pointed a finger at her and smiled. "They're together. Why are you joining in the fun?" Qin Mu rolled her eyes. "I said that I'm treating today. You're making it hard for me to behave like this. You're the one who's in trouble." Zhou Chengwang sneered. "I don't believe that you can't tell that Zhao Yan only has you in his heart." Qin Mu glared at him. "Zhou Chengwang, don't go too far. I'm just asking you to have a meal with me. Is that too much?" Zhou Chengwang smiled. "Then you went to disturb the couple's relationship and seduce a married man. Isn't that even more too much?" Qin Mu was furious. "I didn't. Mental damage counts." Zhou Chengwang smiled. And Qin Mu was not in the mood to eat with Zhao Yan and the others anymore. It was as if eating with them would confirm her crime of destroying a family. But it wasn't good to leave. She could only sit with Zhou Chengwang and exchange glances with Zhao Yan's wife. Zhao Yan's wife also knew about Zhou Chengwang. She looked at them and revealed an understanding smile. It was a very kind smile. Zhou Chengwang whispered in Qin Mu's ear, "Look at how innocent the girl is. Qin Mu, do you have the heart to destroy her love?" Qin Mu couldn't be bothered to get angry. She glanced at him and called the waiter over to order the most expensive dish there. Zhou Chengwang smiled and said nothing. During the meal, Qin Mu didn't say much to him. She just ate quietly. Zhou Chengwang didn't force her. He was satisfied as long as he could be with her like an old friend. His feelings for her were extremely lowly. Her good, he thought, was better than anything. As for her and Zhao Yan, on the one hand, it was a joke, and on the other hand, he was looking for an excuse. Otherwise, Why would she sit down and eat with him immediately? When Zhao Yin turned around after playing a few songs, Qin Mu was gone. His little wife blushed and said, Mu Mu met her ex-husband. She may not be able to eat with us. Zhao Yin nodded lightly. Then, his gaze landed on Zhou Chongwang's face, and he smiled. Men understood men. They could tell with just a glance. He sat down and took a sip of the aperitif. His little wife whispered softly, Will Mu Mu remarry her ex-husband? He seems to like Mu Mu very much. Zhao Yin smiled at his little wife and said, Maybe. However, his mind had already drifted away. Just as Zhou Chongwang had said, love was only on the surface. In Zhao Yan's heart, there was only one girl, and that was Qin Mu. However, this feeling was destined to be buried for the rest of his life. His eyes were deep. His little wife whispered, Why don't we help them? Before Zhao Yin could say anything, she had already called the waiter over and whispered a few words. Zhao Yin wanted to stop her, but it was too late. After saying that, his little wife turned her head and looked at him with a look of asking for praise. Zhao Yin, what do you think of this idea? There was an indescribable joy in her expression. There was also a dazzling look. Zhao Yin looked at her and felt a little tenderness in his heart. No matter what, she was still liked by him. He smiled and said, It's pretty good. Chapter 2654. After Zhao Yin said that, a smile appeared on his wife's face. It was a little dazzling. Zhao Yin looked at her and stretched out his hand to gently stroke her cheek, which was a form of love. At that moment, the lights in the restaurant dimmed and Jacques music started playing. It was a very seductive kind. Then, Zhou Chongwang's table was invited up to the stage by the restaurant staff. They danced to the soothing music. Zhou Chongwang smiled and signaled to the waiter that he would go up in a while. However, Qin Mu was not willing. She looked at Zhou Chongwang. I didn't say that I was willing. Her voice was a little angry. Look at you now. How can you not go up? Zhou Chongwang's tone was still very calm. Qin Mu, it's just a dance. Nothing else. Qin Mu looked around. Many people were already looking at them. She thought about it and agreed. Just like what he said, it was just a dance. It was nothing. She pursed her lips and got up. Zhou Chongwang reached out to her. Qin Mu paused for a moment. Finally, she gave her hand to him. When he held her hand, their eyes met. In the dim light, there was an indescribable feeling. Zhou Chongwang held her hand and walked to the middle of the restaurant. There was a performance stage that was about 10 square meters in size. Above it, a beam of light poured down vertically and shone on them, giving them the feeling of a male and female lead. Zhou Chongwang dragged Qin Mu slightly towards him. With one hand on her waist, their bodies were closely together. Accompanied by the music, he gently swayed their bodies. This kind of music was most suitable for a face-to-face dance. There was no need for big steps. They just had to stick together. Qin Mu's face was forced to stick to his shoulder. It was pressed against the good quality of his clothes. She sniffed the manly scent on his body. Her nose felt a little sore. In the dim light, the two of them seemed to have forgotten about the past. They were only immersed in those few short minutes. The scene of them hugging each other was quiet and beautiful. Zhao Yan's little wife bit her lips and looked at him. She smiled and said, You see, they're still in love. Zhao Yin was momentarily stunned. However, he quickly regained his senses and smiled. Yes, they're still in love. Everyone knew it. Zhou Chongwang and Qin Mu also knew it. They just decided not to be together. Now that Gu Mei was in the mental hospital, he didn't understand what Zhou Chongwang was waiting for. Now that Gu Mei was in the mental hospital, he didn't understand what Zhou Chongwang was waiting for. Gu Mei had given birth, but it was also true that Qin Mu loved Zhou Chongwang. This was how relationships between men and women worked. Time could take away everything. The main problem for them was Zhou Chongwang, not Qin Mu. As a woman, it was normal for Qin Mu to not want to turn back. However, Zhou Chongwang was not normal. Zhao Yin thought that maybe it was because he loved her too much that he was like this. He suddenly turned his head and looked at his little wife. He realized that she was looking at him with a teary gaze. She seemed to have realized something. She looked like she was about to cry. Zhao Yin sighed and pulled her over. He sat her on his lap and pressed his forehead against hers. Don't let your imagination run wild. Chapter 2655. Zhao Yin thought to himself that it was quite distressing for such a well-behaved girl to be so obedient. Besides, she was the mother of his child. He placed his palm flat on her lower abdomen and smiled. I'll take you to see the fireworks later, okay? She smiled at him, and it was a very peaceful smile. It was a kind of faint happiness. Zhao Yin thought that this was it. He would slowly fall in love with her bit by bit, starting from family love. Two strong emotions were not suitable for him. No, it was, if he couldn't want it, why should he force it? That was what he thought. In the middle of the stage, Zhou Chengwang and Qin Mu stopped. When he let go of her, his hands were empty, as if he had lost the most important thing in his life. It was the same for Qin Mu. She looked at him and smiled softly. Zhou Chengwang smiled back and said in a hoarse voice, "Let's go eat." There was a burst of applause around them. At this time, the lights were on. The atmosphere was quite subtle. Qin Mu's face was a little red. She didn't say anything during the meal, and Zhou Chengwang didn't force her. After the meal, she said goodbye to Zhao Yin and saw a hint of cautiousness in Zhao Yan's wife's eyes. She turned her head to look at Zhou Chengwang and sighed in her heart. Even if Zhao Yan's family invited her in the future, she really shouldn't get too close. When Zhou Chengwang offered to send her back, Qin Mu agreed. She also seemed to see Zhao Yan's wife breathe a sigh of relief. She smiled faintly and walked out with Zhou Chengwang. When they were outside the restaurant, she said directly, "I can take a taxi." Zhou Chengwang looked at the busy road, then turned his head to look at her and smiled. "How are you going to go?" Qin Mu snorted. "We've already danced. Nothing will happen if I send you back." His voice was very low. "Trust me, Mumu." She looked at him with an ambiguous expression. However, she still agreed. Zhou Chengwang had always been well-behaved. He opened the door for her and didn't say much on the way. He just played Hua Qinyu's Glimmer. The lyrics made people's hearts ache. Qin Mu suspected that he did it on purpose, so she turned her head to look at him. Zhou Chengwang had been keeping a low profile. He drove quietly, his eyes focused on the road ahead. Qin Mu pursed his lips and turned his face away, looking out of the window. It was quiet between them until they reached Qin Mu's apartment. Zhou Chengwang stopped the car slowly and tilted his head. "We're here." Qin Mu nodded and got out of the car. He called her name. Qin Mu turned to look at him. Zhou Chengwang smiled. "Be careful when you go upstairs." Qin Mu nodded. "Zhou Chengwang, thank you for sending me back." She got out of the car, but he didn't stop her. He just looked at her back and had a feeling in his heart. It was like he was in love and sending her home. But this kind of feeling was just his idea. With a wry smile, he turned the car around and drove to his hotel. He arrived at the hotel. A surprise was waiting for him. Fortunately, he had just seen Qin Mu, and Lin Shui had given him a heads up today, so when Zhou Chengwang saw her, he was not particularly surprised. In the lobby of the hotel, he looked at the familiar face and his heart palpitated. After all, it was very similar. Chapter 2656. But no matter how much she resembled him, she wasn't that person. After a brief moment of palpitation, Zhou Chengwang's gaze turned slightly cold. He looked at the woman in front of him and slowly stopped in his tracks. Kiki was obviously different now. He didn't know where she found her sugar daddy, but she seemed to have a strong tendency to support her. This time, she even brought an assistant with her. Zhou Chengwang looked at that face. It was an eyesore no matter how he looked at it. In the past, he used that face to miss someone and also to hurt Gumei. He felt quite guilty that Kiki's face was disfigured. After all, he was the one who brought all this to her. He was willing to do everything he could to make it up to her, and he had never given her any wrong impression. Now, she had made her face look like Qin Mu, which made Zhou Chengwang very, very uncomfortable. He looked at her quietly for a long time and said softly, "No matter how much it costs, I'll pay for this face." If it weren't for the guilt he felt before, he would have asked someone to take her to the surgery right now. His attitude at this moment was enough to explain his inner thoughts. Kiki was a little hurt. She pursed her lips and looked at Zhou Chengwang in front of her. Her lips trembled slightly. "Zhou Zong, I thought you would like it." She covered her face. In the past, she could be by his side because of this face. It was normal for him to dislike her when her face was disfigured. But now, she looked more like her than before. Why did he still not like her? Zhou Chengwang's voice was very cold. I told you, even if you wore her skin, you still wouldn't be her. Moreover, he hated it when people used Qin Mu to get close to him. His voice became even colder. You and I have always been just a money deal, nothing else. If you insist on working in the entertainment industry with this face, my legal team will sue you until you doubt your life. Kiki's lips were tightly pursed, and the muscles on her face were also trembling abnormally. After a long time, she said in a low voice, "Is it because you're with her again that you don't accept me?" Zhou Chengwang didn't want to be entangled with her, and he wouldn't explain his relationship with Qin Mu to unrelated people. He only said in a low voice, "Think about it. I'll give you 3 days." It was impossible for him to let Kiki hang around with this face. What if she slept with him or acted out? Wouldn't that mean that Qin Mu was showing off in front of others? Zhou Chengwang couldn't accept it no matter what, so he said that. The assistant beside Kiki tugged at Kiki, hinting at her not to fight head-on. Kiki still wanted to say something, but Zhou Chengwang had already walked into the elevator. He stood in the elevator and dialed Zhao Zi's number. From now on, send someone to protect Qin Mu 24 hours a day. His voice was low and hoarse. He couldn't let his mistake implicate Qin Mu again. He couldn't, no matter how much he had to pay, no matter how many sins he had to commit. From now on, he would only live to protect her and Shui Mu. He left. Kiki was still standing in the same place, murmuring to herself, "Why doesn't he like me?" The assistant said in a low voice, "Why don't we just forget it? We can make her look like Jin Shishan, who is popular and no one cares about her." "But she's outdated," Kiki said in a low voice, "and Zhou Chengwang doesn't like Jin Shishan." The assistant was speechless for a moment. Kiki was stunned for a while, and then said, "You go back first." The assistant was a little worried, afraid that she would provoke Zhou Chengwang. Chapter 26:57. Early morning in B City. The sun drove away the last trace of darkness, and the whole world was shrouded in sunlight. Even in the darkest place, there's a ray of light. Gume sat in the single ward, listening to the sound of the door opening and closing. She knew that the doctor had started his ward round early in the morning. It was the same every day, the cycle repeated. She was also counting the days. She knew that she had been locked up in this dark place for nearly 6 months. In the past 6 months, Zhou Chengwang hadn't come to see her even once, not even once. Even her family hadn't. She, Gume, was a person who had been abandoned by the whole world. The door opened with a creak. The sunlight outside shone on Gume's pale face, causing her to immediately raise her hand to block it. She said hoarsely, "Close the door." She did not want to see the sunlight. If she was destined to be here for the rest of her life, she would not need the sunlight. This was not a hospital, but a cage. It was the cage that Zhou Chengwang punished her by locking her here. Just for that bitch. She knew that it was not for Kiki, but for Qin Mu. He said that she was crazy and locked her here for treatment because he was afraid that she would hurt his sweetheart. Gume smiled coldly. The last time, she was locked up for him for 4 years, and this time, it was for the rest of her life. Under the dim light, her face was frighteningly thin, and there were 2 deep shadows on the sunken part, making her look even more gloomy and scary. The female doctor walked over, looked at Gume, and said mechanically, "Take your temperature." Gume also took the thermometer mechanically. During the waiting time, she did not speak. The 2 nurses at the side were expressionless. In such a hellish place, there was no need for too many emotions. 2 minutes later, Gume returned the thermometer. The doctor recorded it, asked a few more questions, and gave her 2 pills. Gume refused to take it, but after struggling for a long time, the nurse still forced it down. Gume was forced to swallow the medicine and felt a burning sensation in her stomach. Her body was thrown in that place, and it looked extremely broken. She said hoarsely, "Did Zhou Chengwang ask you to harm me? Did this medicine make me crazy?" The doctor looked at her as if she were crazy, feeling that she was pitiful and at the same time repulsive. After all, Gu Mei was a famous person in B City. Everyone knew about her past deeds. Now that she had become like this, Mr. Zhou was already merciful for not divorcing her. Now she was simply suffering from persecutory paranoia. Even if she was treated here, she would feel that someone had harmed her. The doctor ignored her. It was the same every day when she was fed medicine. It was all forced. Everyone was used to it. Gu Mei didn't get worse, but she didn't get better either. Her illness was in her heart, and no one could cure her. When the doctors and nurses left, Gu Mei's fingers clung onto the bed, and she couldn't get up for a long time. She wanted to drink water. She felt very uncomfortable. He ran as fast as he could to the little table by the bed, poured himself a glass of water, and gulped it down. When she was done, she leaned on the table and chuckled softly. Day after day, every day passed like this. Tears rolled down her cheeks. Was this the price she had to pay for causing Shui Mu's death? Suddenly, Gu Mei's gaze froze. She looked at the place where the cup had been. There was a photo. She picked it up gently. When she saw it, she was stunned. Chapter 2658. No, to be precise, it was Qin Mu and Zhou Chengwang, as well as Shu Mu. No matter what, she knew her son. The background was a place she was not familiar with, and the scene was heartwarming. Qin Mu was holding her Shu Mu, while Zhou Chengwang stood by the side, looking at Qin Mu tenderly. Gu Mei let out a shrill scream. Her body hit the corner of the table, but she couldn't feel the pain anymore. She had been tricked. She looked around and smiled coldly. She had been living in this dark place, living a life that was neither human nor ghost. She thought she was atoning for Shui Mu, but the truth was so ironic. Qin Mu had snatched Shui Mu away, snatched her son away. How could this be? It couldn't be. Gu Mei raised her head, her whole body trembling. She tried her best to suppress herself so that she would not scream out loud. After a while, she flipped to the photo. There were a few lines on the back of the photo. Gu Mei looked at it and suddenly smiled coldly. In Zhou Chengwang's heart, Qin Mu had always been the white moonlight. If she destroyed Qin Mu, would Zhou Chengwang still love her? In the past, she had been too soft-hearted and hadn't done anything to Qin Mu. Gu Mei's eyes flashed with a trace of viciousness and rationality. 2 days later, Zhou Chengwang received a call. Gu Mei had disappeared from the mental hospital. He stood in the office and was stunned for a long time. He immediately called Qin Mu. Qin Mu picked up after a few minutes. She asked him softly, "It's been hot recently. Don't go out too much, okay?" Zhou Chengwang's throat was a little dry. In the end, he couldn't say it. He just smiled faintly and said, "It's been hot recently. Don't go out too much, okay?" Even though Qin Mu was slightly surprised, he still nodded his head lightly. Zhou Chengwang didn't say anything more, but he didn't hang up the phone immediately. Using her light breathing, he seemed to be able to dispel his longing. After a long time, Qin Mu said faintly, "If there's nothing else, I'll hang up." Zhou Chengwang made a sound of acknowledgement and waited for her to hang up before hanging up. Then, he immediately looked for Zhao Ziyi and said in a light tone, "Send more people to protect Qin Mu 24 hours a day. No matter where she goes, let someone follow her. Add 2 more female bodyguards to follow her in plain clothes." Zhao Ziyi looked at him. Gu Mei has escaped. Zhou Chengwang narrowed his eyes. "Go find Kiki. I have something to ask her." However, when Zhao Ziyi went to look for Kiki, Kiki disappeared, as if she had evaporated from the world. This could prove that Kiki was the one who did it. Zhou Chengwang didn't know what Kiki had done to provoke Gu Mei into escaping. Moreover, it was impossible for Gu Mei to escape alone. She must have worked with someone from the inside. But now wasn't the time to look into this. The most important thing now was to protect Qin Mu and find Gu Mei and Kiki. Obviously, Zhou Chengwang was one step slower. He didn't expect that Gu Mei would know about Shui Mu's existence, and she had taken Shui Mu away. When Annie Zhang called, he was stunned. Then, there was no need to hide it anymore. He called Qin Mu and told her that Gu Mei had escaped. If Gu Mei had been crazy about love in the past, then the current Gu Mei was in a life-and-death struggle. The phone rang again and again, but no one picked up. Zhou Chengwang's heart sank to the bottom. Shui Mu might have a glimmer of hope in Gu Mei's hands, but he didn't dare to think about Qin Mu. Chapter 2659. It was a city-run farm. Knowing the address, Zhou Chengwang still went there, even though he knew that Gu Mei was trying to lure him there on purpose. At the end, Gu Mei laughed sinisterly. If you dare to bring the police over, don't even think about taking Qin Mu's life. Zhou Chengwang pursed his lips and suppressed his voice. I'll go alone. Gu Mei, Shui Mu is your son. Don't hurt him. Gu Mei's voice was a little shrill. Isn't he the son of you and Qin Mu? Haven't you already given him to Qin Mu as your son? Zhou Chengwang bit his lips and said, Are you crazy? Qin Mu and I are not together. Zhou Chengwang, I won't believe a word you say anymore. Gu Mei sneered. Trust me. Come here later. There will be a wonderful show waiting for you. Zhou Chengwang's heart sank, and he hung up. Zhao Zi said in a low voice, I'll go with you. Zhou Chengwang quickly shook his head. No, I'll go alone. She can really do anything now. Zhao Zi pursed his lips and had no choice. Then we'll wait for you nearby. Zhou Chengwang nodded and said, Don't get too close. As soon as he finished speaking, he quickly walked out. Zhao Zi looked at his back and felt that he had a kind of resolute aura. Chengwang seemed to have put himself aside. He wanted Qin Mu and Shui Mu to live. Did he not care about himself anymore? It was so dangerous, but he still went. Half an hour later, Zhou Chengwang's car stopped at the gate of the dilapidated farm. He quickly jumped out of the car and walked towards the abandoned warehouse. Every step he took, he could smell a rotten smell. And his son, his Mumu, was locked up here. How scared they must be at this moment. However, what Zhou Chengwang didn't expect was that apart from Shui Mu and Qin Mu, there was another unexpected person. That person was Gu Zhe. Gu Zhe was lying on the ground, obviously unconscious. He must have been ambushed by Gu Mei. At that moment, Gu Mei was sitting on a shabby chair, holding Shui Mu in her arms. She was holding a gun, which was pointed at Shui Mu. Zhou Chengwang's heart skipped a beat. Gu Mei, are you crazy? Gu Mei was still looking at Zhou Chengwang and chuckled. Yes, I'm crazy. You forced me to go crazy. She paused and kicked Gu Zhe, but Gu Zhe did not respond. Today, let's play an interesting game. It's a test. Let's see who the most important person in your heart is. Huh? Gu Mei's eyes flashed with excitement. Zhou Chengwang suppressed himself. Shui Mu is your son, and Gu Zhe is your brother. Gu Mei, you're crazy. You want to hurt them. If there's anything, just come at me. Point the gun at me and kill me. Then everything will be over, huh? As he said that, he walked towards Gu Mei step by step. Don't come over, or I'll kill your son with one shot. Gu Mei's voice was very cold. Also, don't you want to see Qin Mu, your true love? Zhou Chengwang stopped. He looked at Gu Mei and said softly, Gu Mei, our grudge has nothing to do with Qin Mu. Let her go. Nothing to do with her. Gu Mei sneered. She took out a photo from her pocket and threw it at Zhou Chengwang's feet. Look at this. Tell me if it has anything to do with her. Zhou Chengwang looked in her eyes, slowly squatted down, and picked up the photo. Are you willing to do that? Zhou Chengwang said firmly. If it can make you feel at ease and dispel your doubts. I can even help you convince her. I don't need you. Gu Mei chuckled. I have a better way. She tilted her ear, a strange smile on her face. Listen, it's Qin Mu who's in pain. Shinin. Chapter 2661. Gu Mei's gaze landed on his face again. She really loves you. She came here obediently when she heard that Shui Mu was with me. My brother also came here when he heard that Qin Mu was with me. Now that you're here, does that mean we've caught them all? Zhou Chengwang clenched his fists. Gu Mei, what exactly do you want? Don't worry. Gu Mei chuckled. You'll like it. She looked at Zhou Chengwang and said slowly, I fed her an aphrodisiac. It's a very strong one. She'll die if there's no man around. Zhou Chengwang, she needs you now. He naturally didn't believe that she would be so kind. His eyes were cold. You don't believe me? Gu Mei carried Shui Mu and moved her chin to the side. Your goddess is right there. You haven't touched her for a long time, right? Go and have a good time, because this is the last time. Zhou Chengwang didn't move, but he heard Qin Mu's voice and saw her face. She was lying in the corner, her face abnormally red. Her hands were tied behind her back. She lay there and looked like she was in extreme pain. Gu Mei sneered. If you don't go, not only will your goddess die, your son will also die right now. Zhou Chengwang stared at her and said softly, Gu Mei, I've never seen anyone more cruel than you. Cruel? I don't think so, because there's more to come. Gu Mei chuckled. Later, you'll have to leave with Shuimu first. When Qin Mu wakes up, my brother, Gu Zhe, will be with her naked. Zhou Chengwang closed his eyes. Gu Mei, why are you doing this? Interesting. Gu Mei laughed. If Gu Zhe doesn't have a wife, he'll probably be a bachelor. I'm just pitying him. Zhou Chengwang pursed his thin lips. Gu Mei pointed the gun at Shuimu. At this moment, Shuimu burst into tears. This was the most difficult moment for Zhou Chengwang. Gu Zhe woke up, but the medicine made him unable to move. He could only lie there and look at Zhou Chengwang. Go. Otherwise, I will take your son's life right now. Gu Mei smiled coldly. Everyone here will not be able to live. Zhou Chengwang, think about it. You'll be the only one who'll suffer in the end. I promise, I won't hurt Qin Mu. After all, she'll be Gu Zhe's wife in the future. Gu Zhe's eyes were filled with sorrow. Zhou Chengwang clenched his fists. He looked at Gu Zhe and smiled faintly. He whispered to Gu Zhe, take good care of her. Slowly, he walked towards Qin Mu. With every step he took, his heart beat violently, and with every step he took, he felt an unbearable pain. Finally, he knelt down beside Qin Mu and lowered his head to kiss the corner of her mouth. A slender arm immediately hooked onto his neck in the dim light. That arm was smooth and alluring. It hugged Zhou Chengwang's neck, and hot red lips quickly covered his mouth. The medicine made Qin Mu forget her shame and everything around her. She was in pain, and she didn't know who was in front of her, but she knew that he had something she wanted. Right in front of Gu Mei, as Shuimu cried, and as Zhou Chengwang was in pain, her fingers went through his shirt, and she desperately lifted her body to kiss him. Zhou Chengwang closed his eyes slightly, and after a few seconds, he kissed her back. This was the last time, he told himself. Chapter 2662. In the dim light, the man and the woman were entangled to the extreme. Gu Mei looked at it coldly. Gu Zhe lay there, unable to do anything. He said softly, does this make you feel happy, Gu Mei? Gu Mei's gaze was still there, but her words were directed at Gu Zhe. Only when it hurts more can I feel that I'm alive. Gu Zhe closed his eyes. I won't cooperate with you. Can you refuse such warmth? Gu Mei laughed. No, you won't. You're showing me such a scene. Is it warmth? Gu Zhe laughed coldly. Gu Mei carried little Shuimu to his side and smiled gently. From now on, she's yours. You don't know how many times she has slept with Zhou Chengwang in the past. One more time won't make a difference. Her gun slowly moved to Gu Zhe's heart. Be good, or don't blame me for ignoring our sibling relationship. As she said that, she stood up and looked over there with a deep gaze. She smiled. Look at how compatible their bodies are. What a pity. From now on, this body is yours. Gu Zhe, make good use of it, okay? Gu Mei smiled gently. How interesting. They would never forget such a scene for the rest of their lives. In the future, would Zhou Chengwang be in pain when he saw Gu Zhe and Qin Mu together? Gu Mei smiled gently. Suddenly, she raised the gun in her hand and fired a shot at little Shuimu's hand. Blood splattered everywhere. The blood filled Gu Zhe's eyes. The gunshot made Zhou Chengwang's blood freeze. He looked down at Qin Mu, who had fainted. He gritted his teeth and got up. When he left, he kissed the corner of her mouth. Qin Mu, I'm sorry. This is the last time I'm sorry. He ran over awkwardly. Gu Mei returned the water wood to him, but the gun was still pointed at him. If you don't get treatment in time, even if you don't die, your hand will be crippled. Zhou Chengwang, you can choose to stay or go save your son. If you stay, Qin Mu will be yours, but if you leave, she will be Gu Zhe's. Gume smiled lightly and said the cruelest words. As for Zhou Chongwang, his gaze was so cold that it was almost frozen. He hugged Shui Mu and kissed her. Then, he said to Guze, "Treat her well." With that, he quickly walked out. With every step he took, he felt that the sunlight behind him was an inch further away from him. Gume had won. She had used the cruelest method to end his relationship with Qin Mu. Zhou Chongwang smiled, but his face was full of tears. In the dilapidated warehouse, she slowly walked to Qin Mu's side and looked at her unconscious state. There was a tinge of red on her face. That was the look of someone who had been loved. Gume squatted down and caressed Qin Mu's face with her fingers. She said gently, "How good is it? He loves you." Guze looked sideways and saw her caressing Qin Mu. His heart was in his throat, and he said sternly, "Don't touch her." Gume was still squatting down. She looked over and smiled gently. "Are you afraid they'll hurt her?" Guze did not say anything and only looked at her. Gume did not say anything. She only dragged Qin Mu's body over. She dragged her all the way to Guze's side. Then, she threw Guze's clothes aside. Qin Mu was placed in his arms. Guze closed his eyes, feeling guilty. Chapter 2663. As Gume spoke, she slowly stepped back and said, "I love him, so I can't bring myself to kill him. I didn't even touch the woman he loved. Brother, don't blame me." As Gume spoke, a strange smile appeared on her face. She raised her hand and pointed the gun at her forehead. What she left for Guze was her last smile, and an indescribable apology. When the gunshot was heard, she fell into a pool of blood and closed her eyes peacefully. "Brother, I'm sorry. I made the choice for you. Forgive me for being that selfish and headstrong person. I didn't want them to be together, so I gave Qin Mu to you. I will remember the scene between Zhou Chongwang and Qin Mu, so I won't love him in my next life. Brother, don't worry. Also, I'm sorry. It was me who destroyed your stable life. You will be happy in the future." Gume's eyes slowly closed, ending her life of chasing a man. Perhaps she was already tired and didn't want to live. "And my child, Shui Mu, if there's a next life, I won't treat you like this again." The shot that hit Shui Mu's hand was actually missed, so it will be fine. "Shui Mu, I'm sorry. This time, I'll leave by myself. You stay by my side, okay?" When Zhao Zi rushed over with his men, Gume was already dead. When he looked to the side, he was stunned. Guze and Qin Mu were hugging each other without clothes on. It was obvious that they had done it. He held his breath and said in a hoarse voice, "Turn your backs." At this moment, Qin Mu slowly opened her eyes. Everything that happened before she took the medicine came to her mind. She remembered being forced to take the medicine by Gume, and then she looked at Guze in shock. Guze's body relaxed, and he could actually move. He closed his eyes, and a tear rolled down from the corner of his eye. Then, he reached out to hug Qin Mu and wrapped her in his clothes. He said in a low voice, "I'm sorry." Qin Mu was hugged by him. She turned her face sideways and watched Gume die. She threw herself into Guze's arms, and her body kept trembling. Gume was dead. "Where's Shui Mu?" she asked anxiously. Guze paused for a moment. In the hospital, it was up to Zhou Chongwang to decide whether or not to tell the truth. Guze was thinking that if Zhou Chongwang gave up on Qin Mu, then he would protect Qin Mu. Even if his heart would never be at ease for the rest of his life, he would protect her. One by one, he helped Qin Mu put on her clothes, including his own. In the end, he let go of her and slowly walked to Gume's side. He knelt down slowly and hugged Gume. "It's all over now. Big brother will take you back." Gume deserved to die, but she was still his sister. She was no longer around, and all the evil had vanished in a thin air. Qin Mu stayed by his side quietly. She was still very weak, but she insisted on not leaving immediately. She didn't ask Guze anything either. What happened between them was something that couldn't be asked. Qin Mu didn't think that it meant anything just because they had done it. But what Qin Mu didn't expect was that something unexpected happened later on. Gume's funeral was handled by the Gu family. Everything was suppressed by Zhou Chongwang and Guze. Chapter 2664. Zhou Chengwang stood alone in the aisle of the hospital, thinking about what the doctor had said to him. Mr. Zhou, your blood test last week has come out. There's something wrong with your liver, so you can't donate blood. In addition, we suggest that you arrange a time for a specific examination. If necessary, you need to perform a liver transplant. What he didn't say was that there might not be a liver source or the surgeon might reject it. Anything could happen. Zhou Chengwang leaned against the aisle and smiled softly. Liver transplant? Did it mean that he wouldn't live long? It wasn't strange for a person like him to have such a day. But what about his Mu, his Shui Mu? He vaguely thought of the love in the dilapidated warehouse the last time. Originally, he was a little reluctant to let it go, but now, it was good that they weren't together, and it was good that Qin Mu misunderstood. It was best to forget him. Zhou Chengwang smiled softly, and his smile was extremely sad. Zhao Zi came over and looked at him. Gu Mei is dead. Zhou Chengwang suddenly raised his eyes and looked at Zhao Zi. He didn't say anything for a long time. And Qin Mu and Gu Zhe are together, Zhao Zi said softly. They're also in the hospital now, and Gu Mei has just been sent to the morgue. Zhou Chengwang was in a daze for a long time before he said in a low voice, I'll go and have a look. She was dead, and it was the last time. It was good to send her off. Her tragedy came from him, and it was also good for him to end it. Zhao Zi didn't say anything. However, Zhou Chengwang took 2 steps and stopped again. He shook his head. Forget it. It's better for her to forget me. She won't have any memory of me in her next life. Zhao Zi looked at the dozen or so cigarette butts at his feet and frowned. You're smoking so much again. We'll take care of Shui Mu if you're sick. Zhou Chengwang was in a daze again. Then he thought of Qin Mu. Qin Mu didn't have any children, and she might not be able to give birth. Shui Mu was Gu Mei's daughter, so she was the flesh and blood of the Gu family. If Qin Mu and Gu Zhe were to raise Shui Mu together, it would be great. The Gu family would also treat her well. He smiled, feeling that this arrangement was very good. When he said that he would give Shui Mu to the Gu family, Zhao Zi stared at him for a long time and spat out a few words. Chengwang, you're crazy. I can't be more sober. Zhou Chengwang smiled bitterly. That's it. I can't take care of a child as a man. Zhao Zi looked at him for a long time before asking, You're not hiding anything from me, are you? No. Zhou Chengwang smiled. I can't be more sober now. He tilted his head and looked at Qin Mu, who was slowly walking over from afar. He took out a cigarette from his pocket and lit it. Not long ago, he had felt the warmth of Qin Mu's body. But in the future, her warmth would belong to someone else. Her smile, her kindness, and everything about her would be protected by another man. Gu Zhe was quite good. He smiled. It was quite good. He was clean and dedicated. There were no messy things. In that instant, Zhou Chengwang felt as if he had aged several decades. When Qin Mu walked over, he looked at her with a deep gaze. Zhou Chengwang only now knew what unspeakable pain was. He pursed his lips and smiled faintly. Shui Mu is fine. Qin Mu nodded and didn't say anything. Zhou Chengwang smiled again, but his smile was uglier than crying. Congratulations, Qin Mu. Her eyes narrowed slightly. He knew about her and Gu Zhe. Chapter 2665. Qin Mu looked at Zhou Chengwang quietly, unable to shift his gaze away. Zhou Chengwang kept smiling. He didn't say anything, but she could tell from his words that he seemed to know something. This made her a little embarrassed. After a long time, she smiled faintly. It's good that Shui Mu is fine. Can I see him? Zhou Chengwang nodded. Of course. And Qin Mu, thank you too. He knew that Gu Mei had sent her to the warehouse because of Shui Mu. He said those words of gratitude, but it was against his will. She and Shui Mu were equally important to him, but he always brought harm to her. Now that he was sick, it would be hard for him to recover. Even if he recovered, his body wouldn't be the same as before. How could he give her happiness? Zhou Chengwang smiled faintly, but Qin Mu had an indescribable feeling in her heart. They had finally come to an end. He must have known about her and Gu Zhe, but this blessing seemed a little weak. Until now, there was no one else in her heart except for Zhou Chengwang. This might be the last time. Qin Mu felt that if she didn't say it now, she might not have the chance to. He was Shui Mu's father, and she had slept with someone else. Qin Mu walked slowly to him. She was only a meter away from him. She looked at him deeply, at the man she had loved for so many years. Perhaps she still loved him after the divorce, but she had chosen to forget about him. She said softly, "Chongwang, take good care of yourself in the future." "Yes, I will." Zhou Chongwang heard his slightly hoarse voice and felt sad in his heart. However, his gaze was burning as he stared at her little face. In his heart, he also thought that this was the last time. Qin Mu raised his head, and the corners of his mouth curled up slightly, giving him a beautiful smile. She hugged him gently and rested her face on his shoulder, saying softly, "Chongwang, you have to take care of yourself." His throat seemed to be blocked. He couldn't say a word. The sadness in his heart had reached its limit. He lowered his head and looked at the girl he loved. How he wanted to tell her that he was the one who made love to her. She had always been only him, but now that he was like this, how could he give her happiness? "Zhou Chongwang, you've been hurting her. Let go." Only by letting go could she be happy. No matter who she was with, she would be fine. He patted her back and said in an incredibly gentle voice, "Moo moo, I will." However, she hugged him very tightly. This hug was filled with despair. He knew that what she thought she was doing with Gu Zhe couldn't be done with her. Idiot. Even if she had really done it, she had never let anyone down. It had always been him who had let her down. "Moo moo, if there is another chance, I won't plot against you again. We will be the most ordinary couple in the world. It doesn't matter if we have children or not. When we encounter problems, we will quarrel. If it doesn't work, we will make love until we reconcile." Zhou Chongwang hugged her even more tightly than she did. There was something hot in his eyes, but he tried his best not to cry. He hoped that for the last time, he wouldn't be weak in front of her. He closed his eyes slightly and felt the warmth of her in his arms for the last time. Such an embrace was seen by Gu Zhe in the distance. He stood there with a solemn expression. He had lost his sister. Now, he saw Qin Mu and Zhou Chongwang together. Chapter 2666. However, Zhou Chongwang's gaze made him hesitate. This was the first time that Gu Zhe was in a dilemma. He watched quietly, and then Zhao Zi walked over and said with a faint smile, "Gu Zhe, they have come to an end. If you really love her, please treat her well." With that, he patted Gu Zhe's shoulder and said, "Take care." Zhao Zi left. This time, he could safely get along with his blind date. Whether it was Chongwang or not, it wouldn't be him, Zhao Zi. Gu Zhe was still in line. Gu Zhe was still standing there. He didn't know how long he had been standing there. Perhaps it was only for a moment. After all, this half an hour was nothing compared to the 8 years he had been waiting for. On the other side, Zhou Chongwang gently pushed Qin Mu away. He looked at her with a smile and then pulled out the chain from his neck. The silver end of the chain was shining with silver light. Qin Mu's heart tightened. She recognized that it was his wedding ring. He had been wearing it before. At this moment, he took her little hand and gently placed the chain in her palm. His voice was low and hoarse. "Moo moo, I'll give this back to you. It's officially over." He looked at her and smiled gently. "Don't miss me in the future, okay?" Qin Mu lowered her head and looked at the ring in her hand. She nodded gently and then shook her head. He couldn't help but reach out and rub her long hair. "Don't be so silly in the future. The next man, he must love you first. Do you understand?" When he said that, his nose was sore, as if he was talking to a child who was about to go on a long journey. However, he knew in his heart that the person who was going to go on a long journey might be him. He had done so many wrong things. From the beginning, he had been wrong to approach her. Qin Mu looked up, and her throat was a little dry. Zhou Chongwang suddenly pressed her body over, pressed his forehead against hers, and stared into her eyes. "Goodbye, Mumu." As he spoke, he strode towards Gu Zhe, while Qin Mu clenched the ring tightly. This time, it was not her disappearing from his life, but him completely walking out of her life. She clearly said that she didn't love him, but she still felt sad. When Zhou Chongwang walked past Gu Zhe, he said softly, "Treat her, and Shui Mu well." Gu Zhe narrowed his eyes and was shocked. He looked at Zhou Chengwang, but Zhou Chengwang had already left. He gave up on Qin Mu and even gave up on Shui Mu. He gave Shui Mu to Gu Zhe. This was something that no one had expected. The corridor of the hospital was dark. Gu Zhe raised his eyes and looked in Qin Mu's direction. She had been holding onto the ring in her hand without any expression on her face and didn't make a sound. He walked over slowly and said lightly, "Do you want to see Shui Mu?" Qin Mu slowly raised his eyes and looked at him. Gu Zhe held her hand gently. Qin Mu had been feeling dizzy, and she had not recovered yet. She followed Gu Zhe into the ward, but she did not see that Zhou Chengwang had returned at the end of the corridor. He looked at her being held by Gu Zhe, and a bitter smile appeared on his face. He looked at the empty passageway and stood there alone, looking cold and lonely. When they arrived at the ward, Qin Mu came back to her senses. She gently but firmly broke free from Gu Zhe's hand. "Gu Zhe, I have something to say to you." Chapter 2667. He had been really busy these days. It wasn't that he wasn't in the mood to listen to her, but he was afraid that he wouldn't be able to express himself well. He needed to think about it carefully. The words that Qin Mu wanted to say were all swallowed back down. There was nothing more tragic than losing a loved one. She wasn't that heartless. She stood with him in front of Shui Mu's bed, watching him quietly lying there. Gu Zhe suddenly said, "Zhou Chengwang gave Shui Mu to me." "What?" Qin Mu turned to the side, her face full of disbelief. Gu Zhe paused and continued, "I don't know the reason. Maybe you can ask him." Qin Mu looked confused. Then she shook her head and said, "I don't think so." Shui Mu and Gu Zhe were related by blood, but she wasn't related at all. Why did she have to ask? Moreover, they had just said goodbye. Qin Mu's eyes were misty. Then she sat next to Shui Mu and looked at him. The doctor said he was fine, but she was still worried. She should hate this child, but she couldn't. It wasn't because the child looked like her, but because the child had suffered so much since he was born. Qin Mu reached out and gently touched Shui Mu's forehead. She looked up at Gu Zhe and said, "You have to treat him well. Besides, he needs to go to New York with Qin Shun." Gu Zhe nodded and said, "Okay, I'll send him to New York as soon as he gets better." Qin Mu grunted and didn't say anything else. He lowered his head and looked at the child. She didn't have any regrets. She just had sex with a man once. She didn't even need to think about contraception because she couldn't get pregnant. Qin Mu pursed his lips and felt a little bitter. Gu Zhe stood next to her. His eyes fell on Shui Mu's little face, his heart heavy. Shui Mu would have no mother from now on. His gaze shifted to Qin Mu, and his expression became gentle. She was really, really good. That was why Zhou Chengwang was so upset when he lost her. 3 days later, after Gu Zhe took care of Gu Mei's funeral, he personally went to New York. Qin Mu went with him. After all, she knew Shui Mu's situation the best. She personally handed the child to Qin Shun. Qin Shun checked Shui Mu's body thoroughly. After confirming that there was nothing wrong, everyone was relieved. In the laboratory, Qin Shun put his hand in his pocket and looked at Qin Mu quietly. There were some things that he wanted to say, but in the end, he didn't. He knew that Gu Zhe liked Qin Mu. Now, Zhou Chengwang had given up. Qin Shun sighed. He had thought that Qin Mu and Zhou Chengwang still had a chance. That was why they got together, but he didn't expect something like this to happen. He wanted to take care of Shu Mu, leaving the space for Qin Mu and Gu Zhe. Qin Mu and Gu Zhe sat on the bench, surrounded by white. For days had passed since that day. She sat quietly, and so did Gu Zhe. He was waiting for her to speak. After a long time, Qin Mu said softly, "Gu Zhe, that time didn't mean anything. I don't have any thoughts now. I want to live alone." This was the first time she had talked about it since it happened. Gu Zhe nodded. "I know." He paused, "but I'm willing to wait." Chapter 2668. His voice was firmer than ever. "Qin Mu, I've spent the rest of my life. Do you hear me?" She seemed to be a little surprised. She just looked at him and forgot to shut her mouth. In the end, he still leaned forward and kissed her lips. Before she could react, he went deep and entangled with her. The kiss was lingering and very gentle. She didn't give him a reaction, and he didn't force her. It was very gentle, like how he had always treated her. When he ended the kiss, Qin looked at him. She didn't close her eyes. Guzhe smiled. Qin, I can wait. She was sad. She didn't know if she remembered wrongly, but she also remembered that someone had once told her that he could wait, no matter how long it took. She cried and smiled. She said, Guzhe, it's too hard to wait for someone. Don't wait anymore. He didn't say anything. He just reached out and stroked her long hair. Qin, you don't know. Sometimes it's not just pain, but also happiness and happiness when there's someone in your heart waiting for someone. They sat there and didn't speak again. And from that day on, Guzhe appeared in Qin life. She returned to Bee City, and he stayed in New York for a week before returning. Occasionally, he would call her and talk about Shui Mu. She didn't reject Shui Mu's existence because Shui Mu was Shui Mu. He was no longer Gumei's child. In the future, when Shui Mu grew up, one day, someone might tell him who his mother was and that his mother loved him very much. Qin hung up the phone with Guzhe and smiled. Life seemed to be beautiful. She had people who cared about her and people who cared about her. She sat in the gallery and stood up. I'll get off work first. The assistant smiled. See you tomorrow, Miss Qin. Qin gave her a smile, took her bag, and walked out. It was summer, and she wore a bohemian dress. Her figure looked especially good. He opened the door of a white BMW, got in, and drove to his apartment. Recently, Qin signed up for a cooking class and learned some cooking skills. She didn't eat out after work, but cooked some ingredients at home. She also learned how to arrange flowers and made Qin's model room fragrant. She liked this kind of life. Simple and beautiful. Occasionally, she would think of Zhou Chengwang. That person seemed to disappear from the world. But she didn't call him. The wedding ring that he had returned to her was placed on the bedside table. Sometimes she would look at it at night, but after looking at it, other than melancholy, there was nothing but melancholy. Qin smiled, turned the steering wheel, and turned the car into the gate of the community. Just as she was about to get out of the car, Guzhe called again. She picked up the phone. Guzhe. On the other side, Guzhe smiled lightly. Qin, are you free? Qin was silent for a while. I'm going home. He was also silent. These days, her contact with him was limited to her working hours. Did she see it as a kind of work? Probably because of this, he really went to her gallery to pick a few paintings, just to get close to her. At this moment, her words were full of rejection, but she said in a very gentle way, so he couldn't do anything about it. Qin was good at destroying a man's confidence. He really didn't know why she was so crazy about Zhou Chengwang back then. Chapter 2669. He was sure that Qin taste was perfect, and he wasn't bad looking in any way, but she just didn't care about him. In the end, she just wasn't interested in him. He couldn't do anything to her, but he didn't want to give up. He was a man, and it wasn't that he didn't care when he saw it with his own eyes that day. It was that he couldn't afford to be calculative. They were husband and wife, and he had to do it that day, even if he didn't want to. But Qin thought that person was him. Guzhe made the best of it. Slowly, he felt that the person that day was him, but he didn't have the feeling of losing his soul. Qin didn't let down her guard against him because of this, and she was still polite to him. He was probably still Brother Gu in her life, which made him a little anxious, but he couldn't do anything about it. At this moment, Qin held the phone and said calmly, Guzhe, if there's nothing else, I'll hang up first. He sighed, Qin, I want to see you. Qin pursed her lips and said after a while, if there's anything, let's talk in my art gallery tomorrow. That was the biggest concession she could make. Guzhe smiled faintly and took a step back. Qin heaved a sigh of relief and said in a gentler tone, then I'll hang up. After hanging up, she opened the car door and walked into the elevator. She went up floor by floor until she reached the top floor. Just like before, she took out the ingredients from the fridge and started cooking. The phone on the counter rang, and she was stunned. She looked over and saw that the name on the phone was Zhou Chengwang. She paused for a moment, but still picked up. But she didn't make a sound, and neither did the other side. After a long time, a faint voice came from the other side. Are you okay? Just these 4 words were enough to make her heart ache to the point of tears. Qin held the phone with one hand and covered her mouth with the other. After a long time, she said, "I'm okay. How about you?" Zhou Chongwang smiled. "I'm fine." He paused for a moment before asking, "Is Shui Mu all right?" "All right." Qin Mu pursed her lips. "You can go and see him." Zhou Chongwang was silent for a while, then smiled faintly. "No need." Before Qin Mu could say anything, he had already hung up. She stood there in a daze, and there was a hint of hurt on her face. She stared at her phone for a long time. It took her a long time to calm down. Zhou Chongwang had left a shadow in her heart. For a moment, she couldn't forget it. As for Gu Zhe, although they had sex that day, she would not change anything just because they had sex once. They were all adults, so he wouldn't be a burden to her. Qin Mu was relieved and continued to deal with her cooking. She made curry rice today, but when the fragrance of curry wafted out, she felt nauseous. She suddenly covered her mouth, frowned, and rushed to the sink to retch a few times. She didn't vomit anything, but her heart felt stuffy. She thought about it and realized that she hadn't eaten anything bad in the past few days. Maybe it was because the weather was too hot. She looked at the curry rice and felt that it was a pity, so she threw it away. She only had a fruit for dinner. After taking a shower, she lay on the bed in her bathrobe and searched for the possibility of retching on Baidu. Among the various answers, Qin Mu's gaze fell on a Jihu answer. That was pregnant. Chapter 2670. Pregnant. How is that possible? It couldn't be. How could she be pregnant? In the past, she and Zhou Chongwang had tried so hard for so long, but they didn't have a child. How could she have a child with Gu Zhe once? There must be a mistake. She still felt that the answer was more reliable because it was hot. However, she lowered the temperature of the air conditioner by 2 degrees, but she still felt stuffy in her chest. It wasn't very comfortable. Tomorrow, she should go to the hospital for a checkup. Before she went to sleep, she thought, when she went to work the next day, she didn't feel so comfortable and she didn't have much appetite for lunch. If her assistant hadn't been divorced, she would have joked with her and asked if she was pregnant because the symptoms were really similar. Qin Mu had a few important guests to receive in the afternoon. After she finished, she took the car key and left. It was 4 o'clock, the time she had an appointment with Gu Zhe, but Qin Mu forgot. She only told her assistant that she was going to the hospital, and then she drove away. She went to Xingyuan Hospital and saw a physician first. After she told the doctor about the situation, the doctor was quite cautious. After all, she was Mr. Ye's biological sister, and she couldn't be careless. After thinking for a while, she called Dr. Qin Shun first. It was safer this way. She would do whatever Dr. Qin said. The doctor was actually cursing in her heart. She wanted to vomit. As an adult woman, shouldn't she go to the gynecologist first? However, Qin Mu was divorced, so it was not easy to ask. "You can't ask like this. Miss Qin, do you still have sex? Wouldn't you be killed instantly by asking like this?" The doctor called Qin Shen's number. On the other side, Qin Shen was still sleeping at night, but as a doctor, he didn't have the habit of turning off his phone, so he answered quickly. The physician of Xingyuan Hospital euphemistically told him about Qin Mu's situation. Qin Mu looked a little uneasy as she watched from the side. Was she suffering from an incurable disease? So, the doctor called Qin Shen? She looked at the doctor's expression and gulped. She couldn't help but feel nervous. After a while, the doctor handed the phone to Qin Mu and said softly, "Dr. Qin will tell you personally." Qin Mu looked at him, but still answered the call. In New York, Qin Shen sat on the bed and scratched his head. "Qin Mu, did you have sex a month ago?" Qin Mu let out an ah and was stunned. Qin Shen, on the other hand, was even more straightforward. "Have you ever had sex with a man?" Idiot. It was rare for him to be so rude. He had always been a cold and indifferent person, but when it came to his sister, he couldn't help but curse. Qin Mu wanted to say no, but what happened that day came back to her again. She and Gu Zhe were hugging each other without any clothes on. It must have happened. She was a woman, and her body would tell her whether she had done it or not. She didn't say anything for a long time. There was nothing Qin Shen didn't understand, so he sneered. "Go to the obstetrics and see if you're pregnant." Then he said, "I forgot to congratulate you. Qin Mu, you're probably going to be a mother." After hanging up the phone, she scratched her head again. I don't know which man is so amazing. However, thinking about it, there shouldn't be anyone else other than Zhou Chengwang. Qimu didn't seem like someone who would do a one-night stand. On the other side, Qimu looked at the phone and then at the doctor. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.